What happens when one of the greatest living actors sits down for what should be a simple promotional chat, only to find himself ambushed by a host determined to turn the moment into her own personal crusade? In just 47 seconds, Lorraine Kelly went from smiling morning show presenter to the villain in one of the most shocking meltdowns in British television history. What you are about to hear is not just a celebrity interview gone wrong. It is a masterclass in how power, arrogance, and a complete disregard for basic human decency can destroy careers in less than a minute. This is the story of how Anthony Hopkins walked off a set, and why everyone watching knew he was absolutely right to do it. The morning started like any other episode of The Lorraine Kelly Show. The studio lights were bright, the audience was eager, and Anthony Hopkins, the legendary actor known for his roles in everything from The Silence of the Lambs to The Father, was scheduled to appear. He was there to discuss his latest project, a deeply personal film about memory and family. Hopkins, now in his 80s, had flown in specifically for this interview. He was jet-lagged, tired, but professional as always. He understood the game. Show up, answer a few questions, promote the film, smile for the cameras, and leave. Simple. Or so he thought. But this was not going to be simple. Not even close. The show began with its usual cheerful energy. Lorraine Kelly, dressed in a vibrant purple blazer that practically screamed for attention, greeted her guest with the kind of manufactured enthusiasm that morning television thrives on. Her smile was wide, almost too wide, her eyes gleaming with something that might have been excitement, or might have been something far more calculated. Hopkins shook her hand, his grip firm but polite, and took his seat on the sofa. He nodded as she introduced him to the audience with all the fanfare one might expect for an actor of his stature. The applause was warm, genuine even. Everyone in the studio seemed thrilled to have such a celebrated figure in their presence. Lorraine settled into her chair across from him, crossing her legs and leaning forward with the kind of posture that suggested intimacy, as if she were about to have a heart-to-heart with an old friend. But there was something in her expression, something a little too sharp, a little too eager, that hinted at what was to come. She started with what seemed like a standard opening question. Her voice was bright, cheerful, dripping with that familiar syrupy tone that she had perfected over years of morning television. "Anthony, it is such a pleasure to have you here today," she began, her Scottish accent thick and lilting. "Now, I have to ask this because everyone watching at home is dying to know. At your age, do you ever think about retiring? I mean, surely you have done enough by now, haven't you?" There was a brief silence. Hopkins, ever the professional, smiled politely. His face remained composed, his posture relaxed. But anyone paying close attention, anyone who knew how to read the subtle shifts in body language, could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or the first stirrings of annoyance. He paused for just a moment, as if considering whether he had heard the question correctly. "Well, Lorraine," Hopkins replied, his voice calm and measured, each word chosen with care, "I do not think of my work in terms of having done enough. Acting is not something you tick off a list like a chore. It is a passion. It is something that drives me, that keeps me engaged with the world. As long as I am healthy and the work inspires me, I will continue. I cannot imagine doing anything else." It was a gracious answer, diplomatic, thoughtful, the kind of response you would expect from someone who has been doing interviews for over 5 decades, someone who has mastered the art of navigating tricky questions with grace. But Lorraine was not satisfied. She let out a small laugh, the kind that sounded more condescending than amused, a laugh that seemed to suggest she found his answer almost quaint. "Oh, come on now," she said, waving her hand dismissively, as if brushing away his words like dust. "Surely at some point you must think to yourself, I have had a good run. Time to put my feet up and let the younger generation take over. I mean, How much longer can you really keep going at this? You are not getting any younger, are you? The studio went quiet. It was not a complete silence, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension that settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Even the panel members sitting to the side, three younger presenters who usually chimed in with their own commentary and witty remarks, exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a woman named Claire with blonde hair tied back in a sleek ponytail and a nervous smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face, shifted in her seat. Her hands fidgeted with the notepad in her lap. Another panel member, Marcus, a man in his early 30s with slicked back hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, cleared his throat, but said nothing. He stared down at his notes as if they were suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. The third panel member, Daniel, a younger man with a thin beard and glasses that gave him an air of intellectualism he probably did not deserve, simply looked down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Hopkins took a slow breath. His smile faded, just slightly, the corners of his mouth tightening. His eyes, which had been warm and friendly moments before, now held a hint of steel. "I am not sure I understand the question, Lorraine," he said slowly, deliberately. "Are you suggesting that age should be the determining factor in whether someone continues to work? That once you reach a certain number of years on this earth, you should simply stop doing what you love?" Lorraine laughed again, louder this time, as if she had just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. She slapped her hand on her knee, her bracelets jangling with the movement. "Well, yes, actually," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, every word laced with a smugness that was almost breathtaking in its audacity. "I think there comes a time when you have to step aside. Let the young talent shine, you know? Give them their moment. You have had your time in the spotlight, Anthony. You have had decades of it. Maybe it is time to accept that your moment has passed and enjoy a quiet retirement. Put your feet up. Relax. You have earned it." The audience gasped. It was subtle, but it was there. A collective intake of breath that signaled shock, disbelief, and a growing sense that something was going very, very wrong. Even the panel members looked stunned. Claire covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Marcus stared down at his notes, his jaw clenched, clearly trying to distance himself from what was happening. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Hopkins, to his credit, remained composed. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple, but his voice stayed steady, controlled, measured. "I see," he said quietly, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. "So you believe that my contributions are no longer valuable simply because of my age? That the years of experience, the decades of craft, the understanding of the art form that comes only with time, all of that means nothing because I happen to be older than you think I should be?" "I am just being honest," Lorraine said with a shrug, as if honesty justified cruelty, as if speaking her mind gave her license to say whatever she wanted without consequence. "I mean, look at you. You are what, 85? 86? I am sorry. But do you really think audiences want to see someone your age trying to keep up with the industry? It is a bit sad, do not you think? A bit desperate?" That was the moment. The exact moment when the atmosphere in the studio shifted from uncomfortable to unbearable. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Hopkins straightened in his seat, his posture shifting from relaxed to rigid. His expression, which had been patient and controlled, hardened into something that could only be described as cold fury. "Sad?" he repeated, his voice low but sharp, each syllable cutting through the silence like a knife. "You think it is sad that I continue to work on projects I care about? That I dedicate my time and energy to stories that matter to me? That I choose to remain engaged with my craft rather than disappear into obscurity simply because you have decided I am past my prime?" Lorraine, sensing that she was losing control of the interview, that the situation was spiraling away from her, tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The damage was done. The words had been spoken, and there was no taking them back. "Well, I am not saying you should not work at all," she said quickly, her tone softening in a way that felt entirely insincere, her smile now looking more like a grimace. "I am just saying that maybe you should consider stepping back a bit, you know? Slow down. Take it easy. For your own good, I am only thinking of you." Hopkins let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, a sound that conveyed nothing but contempt. "For my own good," he said, shaking his head slowly. "How generous of you to be so concerned about my well-being, Lorraine. How kind of you to take time out of your busy schedule to worry about whether I am working too hard. I am truly touched by your compassion." At this point, one of the panel members, Daniel, the younger man with the thin beard and glasses, decided to interject. He leaned forward, his voice hesitant, but clearly trying to support Lorraine, to back her up in what was rapidly becoming a disaster. "I think what Lorraine is trying to say," Daniel began carefully, his words measured as if he were walking through a minefield, "is that the industry is changing. It is evolving. And maybe, there is a conversation to be had about making space for new voices, younger voices, fresh perspectives that reflect the world as it is today." Hopkins turned to look at Daniel, his gaze steady and unflinching, his eyes boring into the younger man with an intensity that made Daniel visibly squirm. "New voices," Hopkins repeated slowly, deliberately, as if tasting the words. "Fresh perspectives. Are you suggesting, Daniel, that my voice is no longer relevant? That the perspective I bring, the understanding I have developed over a lifetime of work, is somehow outdated? Obsolete?" Daniel stammered, his face flushing red, clearly regretting his decision to jump into the conversation. "No, I mean, times change, and younger actors bring different energy, different perspectives that maybe, resonate more with today's audiences, and fresh perspectives," Hopkins said, cutting him off mid-sentence, his voice like ice, as if experience, dedication, and decades of honing one's craft mean nothing, as if the only thing that matters is youth. "Is that what you're saying?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to find the words. He looked to Lorraine for support, but she was too busy trying to salvage her own position to come to his aid. Lorraine, sensing that the situation was spiraling completely out of control, that she was losing not just the interview, but the entire room, tried desperately to take back control. Her voice rose slightly, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Look, Anthony, no one is saying you are not talented," she said, her words coming faster now, almost tumbling over each other. "You are obviously incredibly talented. No one can deny that. But let us be real here for a moment. The alternate film you are promoting right now, it is not exactly breaking box office records, is it? The reviews have been mixed at best. Maybe that is a sign. Maybe that is the universe telling you that it is time to think about what comes next." Hopkins stared at her, his silence more powerful than any words could have been. The studio was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. Even the camera operators, usually invisible in their work, seemed frozen, unsure of what to do, uncertain whether they should keep filming or stop. The tension was suffocating. "A sign," Hopkins finally said, his voice calm but laced with a contempt so deep it was almost palpable. "A sign that perhaps the value of art is not measured by box office numbers. That perhaps the worth of a film is not determined by how much money it makes in its opening weekend. But I suppose that is a concept you would not understand, would you, Lorraine? Because for you, everything is about ratings, about numbers, about how many people are watching at any given moment. You have no appreciation for the craft itself." Lorraine's face flushed a deep red. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to lash back, But Hopkins was not finished. He was just getting started. "You invited me here today," he continued, his voice growing firmer, more forceful with each word, "to discuss a project that means a great deal to me. A film about memory, about loss, about the connections we share with the people we love. A film that explores what it means to hold on to the moments that matter, even as time tries to take them away from us." And instead of engaging with that, instead of showing even a shred of respect for the work I have put into this project, instead of treating me like a human being worthy of basic courtesy, you have spent the last several minutes trying to convince me that I am too old, too irrelevant, and too much of a burden on an industry that, by the way, I helped build. The panel sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and second-hand humiliation. Claire looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, to sink into the floor, and never be seen again. Marcus stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists in his lap. Daniel, who had tried to defend Lorraine moments earlier, now looked deeply uncomfortable, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Lorraine, her composure completely shattered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes, tried to laugh it off. It was a weak attempt, a last-ditch effort to regain some semblance of control. "Oh, come on, Anthony. Do not be so sensitive," she said, her voice tight, strained, betraying the panic she was clearly feeling. "I am just asking questions. That is my job. This is what I do. I ask the tough questions that other people are too. Polite to ask." Hopkins stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and incredibly powerful. It was not a sudden angry gesture. It was calculated, intentional, and all the more devastating because of it. He reached down and carefully removed the microphone, clipped to his lapel, handling it with the kind of care one might give to a delicate object, and placed it gently on the coffee table in front of him. The soft click of the microphone hitting the table echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. "Your job," he said quietly, his eyes locked on hers, his voice carrying a weight that filled the entire room, "is to engage with your guests in a way that is respectful and thoughtful. Your job is to have meaningful conversations, to explore ideas, to help people understand the work that goes into creating art. Your job is not to insult your guests, to belittle their work, or to suggest that they should simply disappear because you have decided, in your infinite wisdom, that they are no longer worthy of your attention or the attention of your audience." Lorraine stood as well, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was red, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Her voice shook as she spoke, the words coming out in a rush. "How dare you?" she snapped, her voice rising to a near shout. "How dare you stand there and lecture me about my job? This is my show. My show. I have been doing this for years, and you do not get to come in here, sit on my sofa, and tell me how to do my job. Who do you think you are?" Hopkins looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his face, no visible emotion at all, just a calm, steady gaze that seemed to see right through her, to see past the bluster and the defensiveness to the insecurity and fear underneath. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. His steps were measured, unhurried, dignified. He did not storm off. He did not slam anything or make a scene. He simply left, with the same quiet grace he had carried throughout the entire encounter. "Where do you think you are going?" Lorraine shouted after him, her voice cracking, betraying the panic that was now fully consuming her. "We are not finished here. You cannot just walk out. Come back here." Hopkins paused at the edge of the stage, his hand resting on the frame of the doorway. He turned back, just slightly, enough to look at her one last time. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried across the studio with perfect clarity. We were finished the moment you decided to treat me with contempt, he said. The moment you chose to use your platform, not to have a conversation, but to belittle and demean someone who came here in good faith. I hope for your sake that you take some time to reflect on what happened here today. Good luck with your show, Lorraine. I suspect you are going to need it. And with that, he was gone. He disappeared. Through the door, leaving behind a studio filled with stunned silence and a host who looked like she had just been hit by a truck. The studio erupted into chaos. Well, as much chaos as a morning talk show could manage. Lorraine stood frozen in place, her mouth open, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She looked around the studio as if expecting someone, anyone, to come to her defense, to tell her she had been right, that Hopkins had overreacted, that she had done nothing wrong. But no one did. The panel members scrambled, unsure of whether to follow Hopkins or stay put. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence, some whispering to each other, others simply staring at the empty doorway through which Hopkins had just walked. Claire finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, her words trembling. Wow. I do not even know what to say. That just happened. Did that really just happen? Marcus shook his head, his expression a mixture of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment so intense it was almost painful to witness. I cannot believe that just happened, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I cannot believe we just watched that happen. Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins just walked off our set. Lorraine, realizing that the cameras were still rolling, that every moment of her humiliation was being broadcast live, tried desperately to regain some semblance of control. She smoothed down her blazer, took a deep breath, and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Well, she said, her voice shaky and uncertain, I suppose some people just cannot handle a bit of honest conversation. Some people are so used to being coddled and praised that they cannot deal with someone who is willing to speak the truth. But that is fine. We will move on. We always move on. But even she knew how hollow that sounded. Even she could hear the desperation in her own voice. The audience, which had been silent throughout the entire exchange, began to murmur more loudly now. Some were whispering to each other, others shaking their heads in disapproval. A few were even getting up to leave. It was clear that the room had turned against her, that whatever goodwill she had built up over the years was evaporating before her eyes. Daniel, still looking profoundly uncomfortable, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly, tried to offer some support, though his heart clearly was not in it. Maybe we should take a break, he suggested quietly, his voice barely audible. Just a quick break to, regroup. Lorraine shot him a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. We are not taking a break, she hissed through clenched teeth. We are professionals. We are going to continue with the show. We have a schedule to keep. But the energy was gone. The show had been completely derailed, and everyone in the studio knew it. The magic, such as it was, had been broken. The producers, watching from the control room with expressions of barely controlled panic, were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to spin this disaster into something, anything, that would not completely destroy the show's reputation. One of them, a man named Peter with graying hair and a headset that looked like it was about to fall off, spoke urgently into his microphone. Cut to commercial, he ordered, his voice tight with stress. Cut to commercial right now. We need to figure out what to do here. The screen went black, and the studio lights dimmed. Lorraine stood there in the semi-darkness, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. She looked around at the panel, at the crew, at the audience, and for the first time in what might have been her entire career, she seemed to realize just how badly she had miscalculated, just how far she had pushed things, just how much damage she had done. Claire, ever the peacemaker, always trying to smooth things over and make everyone feel better, tried to offer some reassurance, though even she sounded uncertain. "It will be okay," she said softly, reaching out to touch Lorraine's arm. "We will figure it out. We always do. This will blow over." But Lorraine was not listening. She was too busy replaying the conversation in her head, watching it unfold again and again like a nightmare she could not wake up from, trying desperately to understand where it had all gone wrong, where she had lost control, where she had crossed the line. The truth, of course, was that it had gone wrong from the very beginning. From the moment she decided to treat a legendary actor, a man who had given his entire life to his craft, with disrespect. From the moment she thought she could bully someone into submission simply because she held the power of the microphone. From the moment she forgot that being a host meant more than just asking questions. It meant listening. It meant respecting the people who took the time to sit with you. And as Lorraine stood there in the dimmed studio, surrounded by people who were too uncomfortable to even look at her, she realized that she had not just lost an interview. She had lost something far more important. She had lost the respect of her colleagues, her crew, her audience, and perhaps most importantly, herself. Meanwhile, backstage, Anthony Hopkins was being escorted through the narrow corridors by a young production assistant. Her face was flushed with embarrassment as she walked beside him. "Mr. Hopkins," she began, her voice trembling, "I am so sorry about what just happened. That was completely unacceptable. I have never seen anything like that." Hopkins stopped and turned to face her. His expression softened immediately. "It is not your fault," he said gently. "You were just doing your job. For what it is worth," she added quietly, "I think you handled that with incredible grace. You kept your composure the entire time." Hopkins smiled at her. "Thank you," he said. "Sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply to walk away with your dignity intact." He stepped outside into the cool London morning and took a deep breath. He was not angry, not really, but he was disappointed that someone with such a powerful platform would choose to use it in such a destructive way. Back in the studio, the commercial break was coming to an end. Lorraine tried desperately to compose herself. She smoothed down her blazer, took another sip of water, and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Okay, everyone," she said to the panel, her voice strained. "Let us just move on from that. Let us get back to the show." But Marcus was not having it. He leaned forward, his jaw set. "Pretend it never happened," he said, his voice rising. "Lorraine, that was Anthony Hopkins, one of the most respected actors in the world, and you just drove him off the set. And now you want us to just pretend like nothing happened?" Lorraine turned to him, her eyes flashing. "I did not drive him anywhere," she snapped. "He chose to leave. That is entirely on him." Claire, who usually avoided conflict, finally found her voice. "Lorraine, with all due respect, you were incredibly rude to him," she said firmly. "You basically told him he was too old and irrelevant. You insulted him. You belittled him. How did you think he was going to react?" Lorraine's face went pale. "You all think I was in the wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." Claire nodded as well. "Me too," she said softly. Even Daniel could not bring himself to back her up. He just shook his head and looked away. Lorraine sat there, stunned. For the first time in her career, she realized that she had gone too far. Her need to be provocative, to create drama for ratings, had backfired spectacularly. The cameras came back on, the red lights glowing ominously in the dimmed studio. The show resumed, but the energy was completely gone. Lorraine stumbled through the rest of the episode, her usual confidence shattered, replaced by a nervous uncertainty that was painful to watch. She fumbled over her words, lost her train of thought multiple times, and generally looked like someone who was barely holding it together. The panel tried their best to support the show, to keep things moving, but the damage had been done. The interview with Anthony Hopkins, or rather the spectacular implosion of it, would be the only thing anyone remembered from that day. It would be the clip that went viral, that was shared and reshared millions of times, that became a cautionary tale about what happens when arrogance meets artistry.